Hey, thanks for joining on the new season of Lips Garage. We got a couple new cars, a couple new projects, a couple new plans going on. We're going to start this season working on the 66 Impala. We will be working on the 55 wagon and a couple other surprises that have not arrived yet, but hopefully will be here soon. Today we're going to take a look at the newly acquired 66 Impala. So this is an upgrade over the last one we were working on. This is closer to the show car as we talked about before. The difference between the true hardtop and the post car. Runs, drives, everything works the way it should-ish. A couple of things we're going to be looking for to begin with is going to be basic maintenance and some cosmetic upgrades. So as we take a look at the main coolant hose, we do have a split in the hose. Under pressure we are having some swelling. It's pretty thin, pretty soft. Taking a look at the one down low, I don't see the splits, but again, it's gonna be a little bit soft. So we are going to start with replacing the hoses and flushing out the system. For the other 66, we did get a new radiator. I won't be replacing that today, but that will be in the process. So we have the factory 283, which seems to be running all right. We will do a basic tune-up, but ultimately we are going to be removing this engine for a 350. I might take a look and see if the valve covers I have or the air cleaner I have will fit. Again, just kind of have a little bit of cosmetic upgrades. We do have some exhaust leaks that I want to take a look at, whether it's up at the manifold or whether it's down at the collector. I know the donut gaskets down here tend to leak over time. It is a single exhaust, a little bit quiet for our taste, both mine and the daughter's. So we will be replacing that with a Flowmaster 44 series, I think is what we ordered up. This one again does have the 2-speed power glide. Some of the issues I was having before is going to be in that linkage. This one seems to be operating just fine, but when I do put the 350 in, I'm going to be taking a look at putting a Turbo 350 3-speed in there. We are going to be replacing the belts. I do have some of them on order. These seem to be in decent shape, but they're cheap enough. Might as well, why not? So most of this project is going to be, again, a little bit of maintenance, a little bit of cosmetic, nothing hardcore, but we do have plenty of plans down the road. So I've removed the radiator cap, made sure there's no pressure underneath, took the air cleaner off just to have a little more room to work around. So starting here, again, we're going to be replacing the hoses. So we are going to want to drain the radiator. So this particular one does give you a drain pack, which is nice. It helps a lot. Doesn't make quite so much of a mess. So peeking underneath. This one's all the way underneath. A lot of times you'll see them like on the face of the radiator. Definitely want to have everything nice and cool to the touch before you do this. All right, we're going to get a pair of pliers on that because that one is a little bit tough to turn. Again, generally you're going to want to be a little more careful with this stuff. Some PP blaster, Freon, something like that. Worst case scenario, if that does snap off, again, I do have another radiator to replace it with if we end up going that route. But I'm going to get a better pair of tools on there and see if I can break it loose. Pliers did the trick, and now we are draining down. So kind of like a regular drain plug, this one's just got the hole in the center, and it's going to drain out through that piece there. The fluid itself looks pretty clean, but I'm going to definitely be flushing out and changing that over. I know the folks seem to be pretty confident with the history of this thing, but nothing beats knowing what you've got in here. So I'm going to make sure to replace everything with fresh fluids. So while I have the radiator draining, I am going to test fit the hoses. So taking a look at the lower one, a lot of your hoses these days are going to be what they call trim to fit, just to make sure you've got more than enough. So when I'm taking a look down here, the old one versus the new one, I might end up having to take just a little bit off of here. It actually looks pretty good from that angle. I'm going to reuse the hose clamps, so those look to be in decent shape. When I get to the top one though, you never know with these older cars. By listing, this is the trim to fit top hose for a 1966 Impala with a 283, and we can obviously see it's not. So I'm going to have another trip to the parts house before I finish. But I'm going to go ahead and let this keep draining and get this lower hose off, and then we'll take a trip down there later. Make sure you let all the coolant drain out before you start pulling the hoses off, otherwise you do drain all over crap. The other thing I realized, I have a 66 Impala that had a 350 or a small block in it. So I looked into my collection of spare parts and did find the flex hose that we were using, and we had bought new for that. So thankfully, saves me a trip from the parts house. Just clean everything out, reattach it, and we're good to go from there. This one could probably use a little bit of a trim. I might get something a little more molded when I get the bigger motor in here, but this will definitely get us by for what we're trying to do today. All right, got it drained down enough to where I pulled all the hoses off. We're just waiting for the last little bit to drain out of the radiator. So when you start flushing, you're okay to just flush, but you definitely want to collect and dispose of the full coolant as much as you can. So once you get everything flushed out, I'm going to go through, flush the radiator, make sure all the crud gets out of there. And I'm going to go through and actually flush through the heater core, make sure any buildup that may have started gets cleaned out with it. There's a couple different additives you can do to give you a hand with that. This is good enough shape where I think I can do it with straight water. So again, we're going to be flushing in through the heater core. It's going to come in through this hose here into the heater core, out into the engine, and then it's going to come up through the water pump. Excuse me, right there. And then we're going to flush out the radiator itself. I'll make sure that's all good and clean. Once you do that and you button the hoses back up, you're going to have water in here. So it's usually recommended is you take your total capacity, split it in half, and then you run straight coolant or antifreeze, whichever, and fill your system there, and then top the rest off with water. At that point, you should have a true 50-50 mix. So definitely do your research, do your homework, make sure you have enough. The 50-50 premix is pretty decent, but with the amount of water you're going to have left in the block, you don't know if you're going to have an off mixture or not. So whatever your climate is, whatever your needs are, pretty simple math to make sure that you've got what you need. All right, I'm going to go ahead and start my flush. At this point, I'm going to hand over to my cameraman, Austin, which you remember from one of my previous episodes. Here you go. You don't have to get anything too fancy with this stuff, just regular water, doesn't need to be super high pressure. So we're going to start with just flushing out the radiator. And if you take a look down here while I'm doing it, I left the drain cock open, and then we do have some water coming out of the radiator. It's kind of a milky color. We do want to wait until that gets fully clear and make sure any buildup came out. And the reason why I'm doing this is if we take a look, especially at the old lower hose, we do have some buildup, some material on the inside there. We've got some on the hose. When I take a look at the heater hose, there's a little buildup there. So again, there's just enough that has started to where, take a couple extra minutes at this point. Again, ultimately, most of this is going to be replaced, but good habits make good practice. So we're going to keep flushing this out until that water comes back clear. It's kind of hard to see from that angle, but we are starting to clear up on that. So I'm going to let that drain out. And then we're going to go into flushing the heater core. So again, with the route that we're taking, there is a little bit of junk in there. I did clean out some of it. But we're going to come through, flush out anything built in the heater core. It's going to come out, flush through the engine, and it's going to come out the water pump. So that's going to be where we take a look for our clean water. Now I'm just doing this for maintenance, so I can just sit here and hold on to it until it comes back clear. If you end up having a blockage in the system, a lot of times you're going to take off that other heater hose underneath the water neck, and you're going to take it back and forth, so you'll have a chance to dislodge. Again, at this point, I don't think there's anything, mechanically wrong or damaged, or just taking a chance to make sure everything's good and clean. Yesterday, when we were doing our initial drive, at one point the coolant light did come on, or the hot light did come up on this one. I don't have a gauge on it, so we may end up going to the next route and changing out that thermostat to make sure. This one does not have a fan clutch. It's just straight up, the engine's running, the fans are running. So I might also take a look at that coolant sensor and make sure that's doing what it needs to. It didn't feel like it was driving wrong. It didn't feel like anything was overheating or whatnot. But the fact that that light did come on after our drive does concern me a little bit. So that's another reason why I'm getting in a little more into this maintenance aspect. We still have a little bit of green tint to that fluid. Again, not sure if it's coming out on the video, but that is what we're attempting to clear out. And as I'm talking, it is getting a little better, a little better. And we are running good and clean now. Alright, so at this point I'm going to let everything sit, drain out where it needs to. And when we come back, we will have everything buttoned up and get ready to start adding more fluid. Alright, now we're adding the antifreeze. I've got the hoses hooked up all except for the top. So one of the key aspects is to try and make sure there's no air in the system. That'll come up with a burping and bleeding later. But for the time being, because the coolant outlet is the highest point of the engine, I'm going to leave the hose off until I start having coolant come out of that opening. Once I do, then I'll put that upper hose on and finish filling the system. This particular system is a 17 quart, or essentially just over 4 gallons. So I'm putting in 2 gallons of straight, or what they call pure, you'll hear sometimes. And then I'll top the rest off with water. There's 1 gallon down. And I am leaking out of the radiator before I leak out of the water outlet. So I'm going to go ahead and put my hose on wherever I set it, right here. Not going to clamp it down yet, I'll just have it on. So I'm just shy of getting in my 2 full gallons of pure in. My radiator is full. So that lets me know that there was about 2 gallons worth of regular water in there. So if you were to just top this up with 50/50, then you know you would have an over diluted system. So the other thing I like to do before I start buttoning everything up, I'm gonna put my hand over, keep it from spurting out, but then I'm gonna squeeze the lower radiator hose, and again, an attempt to get most of this burped out. What causes most of your overheating issues, other than mechanical failure, is air trapped into the system. So we're trying to minimize any of that before we go to our final step. So that went down a little bit, not a whole lot. I'm gonna go ahead and tighten up everything now. And then next step will be the next tool. All right, so I've got everything topped up. This is the instance where tools make life a whole lot easier, but at the moment I have misplaced it. They do make a double deep funnel with adapters that'll attach the radiators to give you a big pocket to draw from. So again, the idea being we want to get as much air out of the system as we can. So I'm waiting for is the engine to come up to operating temperature. The thermostat inside the housing will open up and it will draw the coolant down as that thermostat opens up and starts circulating. So I'm going to be keeping an eye on here, and when that level drops, then I'll top it off with water, and that'll ensure that I've got a full system. So at this point, we're just waiting again for everything to come up to operating temp so I can adjust the final level. All right, so the thermostat is opened up. I've got a couple of little bubbling here that you can see. I'm taking a feel of the hoses. I've got heat running through. I've got the heat on in the vehicle. I'm making sure that all that's coming up, and it is. The heat out of the vehicle is good. I've got heat where I expect it out of the hoses. And again, I've got just a couple of bubbles that are coming up yet through the radiator. This particular style does not have a catch can or an overflow can. So usually it's an overflow can. When the radiator needs to puke out fluid, it's got a place to go. And then when the radiator needs it back, it can pull it from a tank. So down here, we do have a bottle. This is factory where you can add it when you need it, but it's not directly connected. It just pukes out onto the ground when it does pressure up where it needs to go. So again, that might be something later we connect those two to give it a true recovery bottle, but as of right now and as of factory, this vehicle is not set up for that. So I'm just going to wait for the last couple of bubbles to come through, and then I'll end up taking a pretty aggressive test drive, let it cool down, and I'll check that level again. But at this point, for what we're going to do today, I am going to be wrapping up. Again, the next step is going to be going through. I'll need an adapter for the carburetor to put the chrome air cleaner on. Again, 100% cosmetic. I will take a look at fully replacing the radiator. There'll be a couple of adapters and things that I need to do to that. And the next step, when I've got parts coming in, I'm going to be replacing the muffler, and we're going to be doing a base tune-up. Might even go so far as replacing the intake, the carburetor. If we do that, I will upgrade the system to a electronic HEI system. But for today, we're about wrapped up. Last thing I've got left is just going to be the test drive. So again, like, subscribe if there's something you feel like doing. Appreciate any comments. Let me know if I'm having content you guys are wanting to see. So anything you want to recommend, any questions you want to ask, please feel free to fill out that comment section. Otherwise, as always, thanks for watching. I'll catch you all next time.